Matthew and Luke get the rest of their material from an unknown source. And that unknown source is called Q. Q is because the Germans who first came up with this idea, the word for source in German is Quelle. And so Q comes from the German word Quelle, meaning source. All right. So Mark plus Q is the basis of Matthew and Luke, according to the two-source theory. Now, here are the problems with this view. First of all, it oversimplifies the evidence. Number one, Luke said that there were many accounts circulating at the time of his writing. So why should we have only two sources for Luke's gospel, when Luke himself says there were many? Okay. That seems to contradict Luke's prima facie claim. Secondly, Matthew himself was an eyewitness of most of what his gospel records. From chapter 9 on, Matthew was a disciple of Jesus. Why does he need to copy Mark's gospel when he was there? He saw it himself. And thirdly, this view ignores the unanimous testimony of the early church fathers regarding the origin of the synoptics. In other words, there's not a single church father who says Matthew copied from Mark. Okay. In fact, there's no indication in the fathers that any gospel writer made use of the other. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't have happened. I'm just saying, if you're looking for evidence to support the two-source view, you're certainly not going to find any in the fathers. The traditional view of authorship, and the one that I espouse, is that Matthew wrote based on eyewitness experiences. The material that he includes, chapters 1 through 9, from prior to his conversion, were taken from oral or written records. And maybe he saw Mark. I don't have any problem with him using Mark for material that he wasn't there for when it happened. Okay. Mark, according to tradition, received his gospel material from Peter. And Papias, who was a disciple of the apostle John, is cited as saying that Mark received his material from Peter. Luke researched written and oral sources. Many, who knows? Maybe Matthew, maybe Mark, probably more. Okay. There is a theological basis for this view, and that is that Jesus promised the Holy Spirit would bring all things to the disciples' remembrance. Jesus didn't understand what was they didn't understand, what was happening when Jesus did some of the things he did, but when he was glorified, they remembered that these things were written of him. And Jesus says the Holy Spirit will bring to your remembrance all that I said to you. Okay, that's not a promise for you and me. The Spirit may bring things to our remembrance, but there's no promise that everything Jesus said will be brought to our remembrance. Okay. And finally, when it comes to the order of composition, St. Augustine was the first one to express an opinion on the literary order of the synoptics, and his view was that Matthew wrote first, Mark, and then Luke. He did not postulate interdependence, merely awareness. Now, we do have evidence, as you'll see in your reading, that Matthew wrote a Hebrew gospel. And, who knows exactly what happened between having a Hebrew version, getting it into Greek. There's a lot of things that we don't know. All right, so that gives you a overview of the Gospels and the